So all development's going to start from a concept. Where do you get your concept from? Anybody have an idea?
Would it be your producer or from your writer?
Ooh, it depends. It could be from either one. Where else could you find a concept from?
The source material?
What's the source material?
A book? TV show?
Oh, okay, those could be one. Script. Somebody wrote script. Well, not quite yet, Steve. So all great concepts should start with an
Idea.
Yeah.
there you go. Thank you. An idea, right? It all starts with an idea. I have an idea about a cross-country car chase. There's an idea. Okay, ooh, that I like that. I bet you we can find an audience for that. I have an idea about, a new alien abduction movie. Oh, okay. Well, I bet you sci-fi might be interested in. People might be interested in that. So the whole thing comes back to concept, and a lot of times it's an idea. It could be a simple idea. It could be I read a book and you know what? I want to make this book into a movie. It could be oh, I've got a comic book. How many comic books have been made into movies? Lots, right? There's a whole franchise, the Marvel Studios. That's all they do. So development always starts with concept first, and it could be anything. And so we're going to talk, throughout the semester a little bit more about developing ideas and how do you capture these ideas? How do you get an idea developed? So a lot of it has to do with just being creative, right? And that's a hard thing to talk about, right? Because some people might say, yeah, I'm creative. Some people might think, well, I'm not creative. And I kind of think creative's like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. So depending on how you perceive yourself or what you determine is creative may influence you in how you believe you are creative. So, and I know that sounds a little philosophical, but what it means is that being creative isn't just the eureka moment where you're sitting back and going, oh, the idea just showed my head. It can be, but I think for the majority of the working class producers and writers out there, you have to work at being creative. You have to make that happen. This doesn't happen accidentally. Yeah, some of us may wake up from the middle of the night with the perfect dream and go, oh, I've got the idea. So that may happen, but you have to kind of work at being creative. And so what that means is being open to maybe recording your ideas. And we're not going to spend time talking about it today, but what you want to do is have a workflow, a plan, a way to record stuff, whether that's a notebook and a pad by you, whether it's hitting the record memo on your phone, or jumping to your computer and having a folder where you have a bunch of story ideas written. That's what you want to do to start basically have a collection system for all your thoughts and ideas, because you may not know when one of them may fabricate into a movie or turn into something more than just this one line idea. But it all comes back to this idea of concept. So once we come up with an idea for a concept, now we're going to turn it into something called a treatment. So what's a treatment? Well, a treatment is usually a one-page write-up about what this idea is. So if I have an idea about, okay, I have an idea about a cross-country race. Okay, great. That sounds like an interesting idea. Is it a comedy? Yeah, I think it's a comedy. Okay, let's do that. So now, once I have this idea that maybe some other people thought were interesting, maybe it's just a title. The idea could be anything. Now I'm going to take it and turn it into a treatment mode. I'm not writing the script yet. I'm not even close to doing that. Now I'm just going to do a one-page write-up. Maybe there's a few paragraphs in there. Maybe it's a list of characters and stuff that I'm going to start taking this idea and expanding it out just a little bit to figure out, flesh it out and figure out what it is. So yeah, it's a comedy about a cross-country race. Okay, well, it's an illegal race. Yeah, so it's an illegal race across country that they're breaking the speed barrier, limits and avoiding police and all this stuff. Okay, well, that sounds even more interesting. Right now, there's a little bit of a maybe drama in here. Maybe there's something. There's a reward too. So it's a millionaire, a multi-millionaire, billionaire who puts the money up for this every year and says, you know what? Every year we're going to have this race, and whoever gets something across the country for me, gets you know, $1 million prize. Now I'm starting to develop this concept into more of a treatment. So it goes in this treatment stage where it's in this whole, all these steps are basically there for you to help figure out what your idea is. So every single idea goes this path. Even if I'm just by myself and I'm going to write the script, I'm still going to do this. I'm still going to come up with a concept. I'm going to write a treatment from it, which is like a 1-page write-up, not super complicated, but enough there that I can get the gist of the story of what this is about. Doesn't have to have all the details. It may not even have all the characters. That's okay. It's just to get the ball rolling, because what we're trying to do is take what's inside of here and dump it out. Now it might be different if I'm adapting a book. Well, I still want to do that. I still need to do a treatment. I still need to break it down, because is a book the same thing as a movie? No. What's the difference?
I think in a book you can get a lot more information because it's certainly going to be a longer read than in the movie. And the movie is 2 hours, and sometimes there's inner monologue that isn't put into the movie that's in the book. Like you hear the characters' thoughts, the way they perceive something, where in the movie it's just their outward dialogue is what we hear.
Exactly. They're two different mediums. So they don't translate. In fact, it's one of the worst things to do in filmmaking is take a book, especially a famous or popular book, and translate it to the screen. It's exactly what you said. If you think about it, if I read a book, let's say it's 600 pages long, how many hours am I going to spend reading that? How much deep information am I going to get out of that? A lot. How do I take that information that's maybe this big and squeeze it into 2 hours or 2.5 hours that's this big? So even though I might say, well, I've got the book here, man, I'm already done, man. I just need to shoot the book. No, I still got to break it down. I still need to figure out a treatment. What is the essential things about this book that I'm going to tell in the story? What characters am I going to use? Am I going to combine characters into one? How much wiggle room do I have in it? This is all stuff that I would sit there and think through during the treatment. It's a difficult thing to do. There's certainly movies that have been failures from being translated from books. There's some that have kind of got the job done. I think the recent one I saw was Ready Player One. That was not bad. It was interesting because they did their own take on it, but they had to squeeze this big story down into this little place. Most films, you know, are not as good as the books. There are some exceptions. The Shining was a good book, but that, in my opinion, became a great movie. There's a couple examples. There's one example where a book was terrible and it was an awesome movie. I remember seeing the original Anybody seen the original Planet of the Apes, the 1968 version? Charlton Heston playing it.
Yeah, and I've seen it and I've never read the book.
So I've seen all those growing up as a kid. And then I'm like, I got to read the book. It's going to be awesome. Read the book. It was horrible. It was terrible.
That's interesting. That's rare.
It felt nothing like the movie. In the book, the apes and humans talked to each other and existed together, and there was no drama. There was none of the weird twist ending, which I won't say for the people who haven't watched it. So it was a bad read, and I realized the genius. I think Rod Serling was the one who wrote the script.
Yeah,
he saw the story in this book and got it out of it and reinvented it, retwisted it to make it work on the screen. So when we start thinking about in the development stage about where the idea comes from, is it my own individual idea? Is it a video game? Is it a comic? Is it a book? Is it a musical? Whatever it is, I have to start thinking about how that thing exists in its own world. How am I going to take it and reinterpret it into the screen? Because remember, these are all different mediums. It's just like we took a book. Like a lot of times movies are made into photoplays, they're made into novels, right? After that, or they're turned into comic books and everything, and they have to change. They can't be the same exact story, the same exact thing. So we need to take that into consideration when we're doing this. Remember that my whole thing is it's all about the audience. What I don't want to do is alienate the audience or bore them or put them to sleep or make them hate my movie. Even if the book is, and that's a hard thing to do with a book, because especially if it's a famous book that people love, because it's going to be incredibly difficult to translate. Think about there's what was the big one that came out like 20 years ago? Big movie that was converted from a book. Fantasy.
Oh, Harry Potter
Harry Potter's one, yeah.
and Lord of the
Lord
Rings.
of, Lord of the Rings. So Harry Potter, I didn't read the books yet because I'm going to read them for my kid, but people seem to like the movies and it seems to work with the story. Lord of the Rings, man, that was a tough movie to watch in the beginning. I read the book, and then when I saw the movie, I was still lost. And it finally took them to make the director's cut, which was when you put all three movies together, was 12 hours long in order for it to tell the story properly. But Peter Jackson knew ahead of time that was going to happen. So he made the cuts that fit in the movie theater and then was going to release the director's cuts later on that were, boom, this big. So those stories were probably in development for years before they even hit pre-production. That's how important it is to get the idea down right. So this all dovetails back to this idea. I'm going to take my concept, whether it's in my brain, a book I read, poem, doesn't matter what it is. And then I'm going to use the treatment to figure out how it's going to fit on the screen. I'm going to just start with the basic idea. How am I going to tell this story? And depending on how complicated the story is going to be, is how big your treatment's going to be. But in reality, it shouldn't be over a page or 2 pages, the max. If it's over 2 pages, then you're going too deep into this thing, because this is just stage one. And what we're trying not to do is, when you go through this process of pulling the idea out of your head or from a book, I don't want to stifle it. I don't want to get caught up and go, oh my God, I got to figure out all these details right now, because what's going to happen is you're just going to stop. The train's going to stop rolling and it's going to hit a roadblock, and then you're not going to let the ideas move forward. So instead of trying to go full deep in this thing, I'm going to start with a treatment, write it up just so it makes sense. And then I'm going to show somebody, close friends. Remember, we talked about this idea of having your friends, that you trust, and show them, can you read my treatment? What do you think about this? You like this idea? Does it seem like it works? And if you get enough feedback where everyone's like, yeah, I think so. I think this is a pretty cool idea. Great. Okay. Now I got to move on to the next phase. And that's going to be the outline. So now is when I'm going to go back and start fleshing out the details. So here's where I'm going to find the scenes. Here's where I'm going to develop my characters a little bit. I have little write-ups of all my characters. We're still not in a script. We're just writing the idea out. So now I've taken the concept, which was one idea, expanded it to 2 pages, 1 to 2 pages on a treatment, so I can actually have kind of a story here to understand it. And now I'm going to take that idea that's expanded into this little story and outline it. So that means who my characters are, developing my characters. What are the locations I'm going to be shooting in? How many places am I going to shoot? What happens in these locations? Are there plot points? Are there major character, arcs where the character starts at one place and does the hero's journey and becomes somebody else at the end of the movie? That's all the stuff that I'm going to start putting here. I still haven't really written dialogue yet. I still haven't written a script yet. But now I'm preparing for that script. And I know you might say, well, do you have to do all this stuff? What if I'm such a great writer and I just put the piece of paper in the typewriter and I just go and it comes out of my head? You could, maybe. If you're capable of doing that, then awesome, more power to you. But I'm going to say, in this day and age, especially with studios having more control over everything, this is the way most things are made. There are exceptions to the rule. You might be a great writer that can just pull it out of thin air, and that does happen. But I'm probably going to say it doesn't happen all the time, or it's not the normal. So outline, breaking everything down, what my act 1 is going to be, what my act 2, my act 3. And if you don't know what these are, don't worry, we will be talking about this stuff in the next week or 2. But I'm going to find out what those plot points are. This is where I'm going to start making the skeleton, the frame of my script. And you can kind of think of it as building a house, right? I'm going to make the frame before I put all the cool stuff, the walls, the rooms, the plumbing, all that stuff in. This is what's going to hold up the house. So same thing here. The outline is going to hold up the script. Once we get through the outline, and how long does it take to do an outline? It depends on the project. My business partner and I had optioned a book that we've been trying to get into a feature. An option means I basically paid the writer a certain amount of money to say, we get the first right to make this into a movie. after say 5 years. And if we don't do it in 5 years, well, we either re-option the book with you, or you can take it to somebody else and get the book made. So we got concept, we started writing the treatment, and then we got to the outline. We actually hired someone to help write it, and that took like 6 months to get the outline done pretty tight. And the outline ended up being like 10 to 30 pages of information. And this information doesn't necessarily translate into the script, but it's like the backstory, everything we need to know to properly tell this story on the script. And so you need this outline with all this extra information, so you know who your characters are, how they're going to flow, what the story is, what's the timeline, what's all this stuff going on. And so how deep you make this outline is up to you, on how complicated your story is, or how much how much time and energy you have to put into it. So once we get past this, now we finally, boom, we hit the screenplay, the script. Now is when the writing starts. Start sitting down. This is where the work is, where the dialogue's happening. You're writing all, the scenes, the action, everything, just creating this thing. This can be a painful process, or if you did a lot of homework and you really got your outline done properly, then the script should just almost write itself. Now, there is software out there that can help you with this. There's screenplay software, there's story development software, there's literally a nonlinear editor for creating timelines and figuring out how to write a story. So you don't need to be stuck in a world where you're just doing this on your own. You can use technology to help you be organized for when you create the outline, and when you start doing that, you can actually start writing the script at the same time. It actually helps you do that a little bit. Once we get done with the screenplay, what's next?
Is this the part where you have people read it, or is this the part where you pitch it?
Not quite. People may read it for sure. Correct answer is rewrites. There will always be rewrites. Guaranteed. If there's something to bet on that you're going to 100% of the time win, it's betting on the rewrite. Every screenplay is going to be rewritten. Some screenplays are rewritten all the way into pre-production, all the way into production, and to the point where they have multiple colors of paper that they'll print the scripts on. So whenever there's a new version of the script, it changes color so that we all know we're on the right. Today we're on green, tomorrow's purple, Friday's pink, just so that everyone's on the right script. And I'm not saying that happens all the time, but it certainly happens. So rewrites are going to happen. So this process of screenplay rewrite may just kind of be a circular loop that happens for a little bit until it finally gets to where it needs to be and comes out. So when you're developing and you hand your script in to the producer or whoever, or me or whatever, and then I say, you know what, I like all this, but you need to fix this or this and this. That's not a bad thing. It's not a negative thing. It's not that you're like, oh my God, I suck or anything. No, it's part of the business as usual. There's always going to be rewrites. There's always going to be changes that are made. And sometimes those changes happen because the people who have the money want to change. And if they're giving you the money, well, guess what? They have a partial say on it. If you self-fund your own movie and you're independently wealthy and you can do it, then you decide, well, I don't want to rewrite because I like it. I love it the way it is, the script. Then you're good. But not all of us are going to fall. Certainly, I know from my experience, not me, don't land in that world. So rewrites are going to be something to be expected. Does it make sense, everybody? And it's just a process. And the goal here, remember, this is all about trying to get this story as tight as possible so that it translates, whether it's my idea, the book, comic, whatever. It's going to translate to the screen in a way that's going to be successful. It's going to make you money down the road, or make you success, or however you want to define it.
If rewrites go straight into pre-production, and I know you said the crew lays out schedules when they're recording when, what is the reaction when they get the new script?
It's not, because 9 times out of 10, the rewrites are not major, huge changes. They're more like dialogue changes or action changes that maybe as they're shooting out the scenes in the movie that the director or maybe the writers there go, hey, you know what, this might work better if we do this instead. And that's okay. That's improvising. That's improving it on the fly. And so sometimes scenes get cut. Sometimes scenes change a little bit. Major rewrites, if you're doing a huge rewrite while you're in production, well, you've got bigger problems. And that means you're already probably in a point where your film is not going to succeed. So when we talk about location, production rewrites, they should be small. If you're doing massive character reevaluations, then you probably didn't do your development very well. So rewrites can happen once, twice. It could happen a ton of times. It's just, there's no really right answer to how many rewrites are good, and when you cross over, it becomes bad. It all depends on the project. I'm sure the Lord of the Rings, I guarantee you Harry Potter went through a dozen rewrites. I couldn't imagine it not, before it got to exactly where it needed to be. So for you guys, you just want to realize that this is part of the process. It's normal. It's normal business as usual. Hollywood, film industry, all accepts this. There's like no question about this rewrites. In fact, it's totally expected. When we're doing TV shows, they're going to write the treatment, they're going to do the outline, and then they're going to write the script. And they know, I know for a fact that the producer, who's a good friend of mine, he's like, yeah, well, we haven't gotten our notes back. He doesn't even expect it not to go through. If it goes to the network and they don't come back with notes, then there's something weird that went wrong, or weird that happened, some miracle. There's always notes. There's always change this, tweak this, fix this, adjust this. And that's okay. Part of the process. Happens at all levels. So once we get past this, now we're going to start thinking about financing. Now, this word here, financing, it could start here in development. It could be in pre-production. It can happen in different places in the filmmaking process, but majority of it's going to happen here in development. So once I have a screenplay written, well, now I've got something that I could shop around and show some potential investors that I have something that could be made into a movie or a TV show or whatever. So the sooner you get that screenplay written, the better off, the more time you have to start finding money in financing. And so how do you get that? Well, there's a ton of ways to do it, and there's no right way and there's no guaranteed way. It's all, who what you're doing, what the project is, who you go for, who you think are going to be potential investors. These are questions that are kind of tough things to talk about in precise absolutes, because it all changes. And even just like in Hollywood, deals fall apart left and right. You may be so close and think the money's in your hand and you're getting ready to go into pre-production, and then all of a sudden investors drop out because they change their mind, and then boom, you're out and you have to figure out another path. Or you might have a project that was greenlit by the studio, and you're getting ready to you're in pre-production and you're getting ready to start going into production, and then the CEO or the executive producer that was greenlighting you gets fired, and then every project that was associated with that producer gets canceled and thrown away. So there's all this craziness, and this is all true stuff that happens all the time. And I've been on shows that I was on a show where that was developed for 2 months. We were on set, building sets for a month and a half. The day of shooting, we literally had everybody there. We're getting ready to shoot, and the producer comes up to me and says, "We just got killed." I'm like, "What?" They're like, "Yep, they just canceled it." We literally just did all this work to get to that point, and then they killed it. And then we all went back to LA. We're all bummed out. And then 2 weeks later, they're like, they changed their mind. Come on back, let's do it. So weird stuff like that does happen. Financing is not a solid guaranteed thing unless you're, Lucasfilm, Disney, or you're in with the big dogs and you're an established name. But the rest of us, the mere mortals, that process of getting to that world of, the big dogs of filmmaking is the fight. That's the battle to get there. Once you get there, the financing comes a lot easier. Still not easy, but a lot easier than when you first start out. So for us, we're talking about low budget independent filmmaking, student projects, financing. Well, that's basically whatever's going to come out of your pocket or your friends or your family, whatever you can put together to pull it off. So it might not be that big of a deal in the beginning, but in the end, you still want to think about it. So having gone through this whole treatment, outline, screenplay, rewrite prepares you also to talk to the investors so that it's not like, yeah, well, I just wrote this script. Well, what's the backstory? I don't have a backstory. I just wrote the script. They're going to be like, I don't know, man. I'm not too interested in that. I want someone who can sell this dream, this vision on the screen, who's going to guarantee, help me, convince me to invest in you as a filmmaker. Because in the end, the financiers are not necessarily investing in your film, but they're investing in you as a filmmaker. That's the big difference here, the misunderstanding most people have. They want to have faith that you're going to create something that will make them a profit, or at least increase the odds of them making a profit. So any 10 different filmmakers could have the same script, and they may not, in that script, just based off the script, they may want to greenlight it. They're not going to greenlight it for every filmmaker. They're going to pick the one they think is going to be have the most success of doing it. And so most of the filmmakers that are going to be chosen or win the lottery, quote unquote, are going to be the ones who've done their homework, that have gone deep into development, have the names attached to the script. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Have a treatment, an outline. I can break all this information out to show them that I know this story. And again, I'll go back to Peter Jackson with the Lord of the Rings. They spent years developing that. And that's how he convinced them to do it, to fund it. He had spent so much time developing these stories properly to bring them to justice, to bring them to the screen properly, as best as anyone could do. And in the end, I think he pulled it off. He did the right thing. Same thing probably applies to Harry Potter. Definitely is happening now for the movie Dune, right? That's coming out this month. It's coming out in 2 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, 22nd, I think. That's an important story. That's a story that lots of people know. They've read the book, and it's been made into a movie. It's been made into a TV show series. So here's Dennis going to show his version, his interpretation of this to the world. Huge amount of resources went into development to make this happen.
So you were saying that financing can happen at any step. But most of the time it's this step, right?
This is where you want to start figuring it out. This is where you want to start fishing and trying to find the connections. You can't go into production. You can't really even go into pre-production really without some money backing you. You might not have all the money, but you need to have something.
So could something happen to where, let's say I have the script and it's even been through a rewrite and they're going, okay, this is ready to pitch to producers, let's talk about financing. And then the producers go, hey, I really like the story, but the scene right here, this is too expensive. Like that, you were talking, like that kind of thing could happen. And then another rewrite could happen, right?
That could,
Okay.
yeah. So, and again, you have to think about what it is the budget's going to be. And I know that's a weird thing to talk about, because in the beginning, you should let your brain go, and you should just be creative and think exactly about what, don't let any financial restrictions stop your creative thought, because what happens is, this kind of jumps back into the independent film world. When we watch like low budget movies, right? What are they mostly all like?
What do you mean?
If you look at the locations, they're usually
Limited.
Conventional times, stuff like people in their apartments. There's no big action scenes. There's nothing big and grand about them. They're small, compact, and kind of, they focus more on dialogue and characters than they do on other stuff. And I'm not saying they're all like that. I'm just saying in general. We're talking about low budget movies, because there's no money. And what happens is if I'm trying to write a story that I know is going to be an independent low budget movie, then I'm going to in my head go, well, I can't think bigger. I can't think of getting outrageous locations, because I know I'm not going to afford it. And once I start going down that rabbit hole, then I automatically force myself to think in smaller boxes and write in smaller boxes. And then my film becomes something that, like every other independent film out there, two dudes sitting in their college dorm or someplace, and it's a character piece. So to me, it's better to think outside the box, go bigger, and then rewrite later on to reshape it when you realize, okay, well, I have this idea that we're going to be shooting, you know, the on some exotic place on Mount Everest, and now I realize, well, we can't do that. So instead of Mount Everest, let's make it Mount Baldy instead. It's better, in my opinion, to do that in the rewrites and reshape it than it is to make something that's not so, interesting in the beginning. So financing can affect things for sure. And it may be forced financing where you actually got someone who's got money and they say we need to change it, or you realize, well, if I start budgeting this out, I can't afford those, so I better reshape it. So to me, it's like a catch-22 between the two. I would recommend just don't stifle yourself in the beginning. I mean, don't write stuff that's about, shooting big space episodic, movie out in outer space on different planets. If there's no way you can make that happen on your own.
Right, unless you had a set and then you call, like, I don't know, something small, and you imply, I don't know, I see a lot of independent movies that have like really good ideas, and then there's a couple things in them where I go, you didn't really need that, and you didn't really have the budget to make it look good. Why did you put it in there? Does it make sense?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you got to balance that out. I think like one of a sci-fi movie I saw I was fairly impressed with Moon. Did anybody see that?
No, what's up?
It was a low budget movie about a lone astronaut on a moon base by himself. But they had a great idea. I'm not going to ruin it for anybody. They had a great idea, but it was really low budget.
That's cool.
But they had the sets that worked. It worked, and they spent their money on little tiny areas, and it worked. It totally worked.
That's awesome.
So you can do stuff. Here's the thought: is that you just got to be creative. You have to really think about where, if I have this much money, where am I going to spend it? What areas should I spend it in, and what areas can I be conservative in and still keep it under budget? Or how can I tell a story that is outside of the vanilla box of the normal independent films, still make it cool and quirky, and not make it just about, whatever. So let's talk about a great example. Everybody see the movie Clerks, or even heard of it?
Yeah.
Right. So Clerks was dear to my heart because Kevin Smith, who was the director of it, was from Jersey, and we were all in college at the time when it came out in Jersey, and he shot it in not too far from where I grew up. And we all thought it was amazing because he figured out it was a character, an independent character stories, right? But he put it in a location that was semi-interesting. Put it in a convenience center like a 7-Eleven, and made the characters really interesting, and pulled it off. So there are exceptions to the rules. It all depends on how good your script is, how important the locations are, and how good of a job you do in this whole development phase. The more work you put into development, the more attention to details and figure everything out in this phase, the more chance of success you're going to have. And I know that sounds like a kind of blanket term, but it's the truth. If you spend the minimum amount of time in development, then the final product is going to come out weak. That's just the way it works. And you may think that this makes common sense. I hope it makes common sense, but there's plenty of examples where I worked on TV shows where they didn't spend a lot of time developing this stuff. And then as we started shooting it, all the problems arose, or things that didn't make sense or didn't work out right. And in the end, the project sucked. And yet they spent some money on it. So once we get through this whole development phase, let's say we got partial funding. We've got someone that says, all right, we're going to fund your pre-production and see how far it goes. And then if it seems like you guys are going to make it, then we'll have another round of investing and get the rest of the money. So a lot of times when financing happens, you don't have to finance all the money at first. So there's plenty of places where financing may come in the beginning. I may have a concept, and I might rate a treatment and then show it to some people that were like, you know what, I think this has the potential to be a good film. All right, I'm going to give you a little bit of money here, development seed money, and develop it. So by having a really solid treatment, or even maybe an outline, I may get a little bit of money, just enough to hire a screenwriter and get through this process. So you could get a little bit of seed money up front, and then once you get through development, then come up with a solid script, get some actors attached to it, and then get another round of financing to go into pre-production. So sometimes this all happens in chunks, and that's what's happening more and more today. And we'll talk a little bit about self-financing and how you can pull that off a little bit. But let me move on before we totally run out of time.